Let's learn about the federal budget together, shall we? I can't wait to somehow find out this is done by a CIA torture guy, like one of those videos we did. Literally, one of these videos had the guy who told the CIA that it was totally fine and legal to keep torturing people in Iraq. He literally wrote memos about how, like, holding a person's head underwater for minutes at a time, or like, stripping them naked and forcing them to stay awake for over a week was not torture. He wrote memos about how, like, actually, if you beat someone in a certain way, it's not technically torture. This is the kind of evil that we deal with the Project 2025 videos. And so I can't wait to see how they turn the federal budget training video into some unspeakable act of evil. Let's find out. Again, when I talk about this being a plan by fascists for fascists, I'm not exaggerating.
Hello, and thank you for joining me for this course on the federal budget as part of the Presidential Administration Academy.
Okay, just real quick. Who's Michael Duffy? Who are you? What are you famous for? Michael Duffy. What'd you do? Just take a quick look here. He seems very oh, good. Yes, he did support legislation to limit collective bargaining for public employees to try and kill, like, teachers unions. And of course is an opponent of the estate tax. Of course. He seems to be a relatively insignificant political figure. He held office in Ohio for a bit. Served in city council. Let's see what he's got to say.
This academy and the training it provides to conservatives like you and I is a key part of an ambitious and much-needed effort known as Project 2025 to prepare for the transition of power to the next conservative president of the United States. Project 2025 has brought together a coalition of conservative organizations dedicated to restoring common sense leadership, fiscal responsibility, energy independence, strong national security, personal liberty and freedom, and traditional cultural and family values back to our great nation. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in this effort and that you have taken time from your schedule to view this course, learn about the federal budget, and take steps toward making a substantive contribution to advancing the conservative movement.
In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle.
In America, we understand that a nation is only living as long as it is striving.
It's only living as long as it's alive.
Only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger.
This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
Whether we go forward together with courage or turn back to policies that weakened our economy, diminished our leadership in the world, America's future will be in your hands.
I'm really worried about this man's tone of voice and it putting everyone...
My name is Mike Duffy, and I'm honored to join you today to discuss the federal government and how to apply this knowledge to promote conservative policies and help movement leaders fulfill the mandate of a conservative presidential administration beginning in January of 2025. The federal budget is the allocation of money to fund the government's activities and operations critical to achieving the government's mission. Tasks won't get completed, people are not paid, policies are not implemented, goals are not accomplished, and the government cannot perform its functions without federal funding. Federal departments, agencies, offices, programs, and officials would not have the...
He does have a kind of deer in the headlights look to him, doesn't he? He looks like... He looks like you just walked in on him and he wasn't expecting you. We might have to speed this guy up just to make him sound more interesting.
The funding they need without the federal budget development and execution processes that have evolved into a long and complex process that we have today, shaped over many budget cycles to enable officials to make recommendations and decisions about how to allocate funds across the multiple agencies of the federal government. Today I want to discuss a few key elements of the federal budget process with you. We'll start with budget concepts such as authorization versus appropriations and discretionary versus mandatory spending. We'll also talk about the structure and contents of the federal budget, the organization and stakeholders of the federal budget enterprise and their role in budget development and execution, and an overview of the federal budget process.
Cool. Lay it on us.
The first concept that's important to understand as you begin to think about how the budget is proposed, negotiated, and enacted is the distinction between authorization and appropriation legislation. Authorization is done by Congress via legislation that, according to the Congressional Research Service, can establish, continue, or modify an agency, program, or activity for a fixed or indefinite period of time. In other words, Congress grants authority to the executive branch to spend funds on a given program, activity, or item, but not that it will necessarily be spent on that program, activity, or item. You're giving the option to the executive branch to spend that funding. When Congress recently passed a 2-year budget deal, it authorized $1.3 trillion in government spending. That legislation only set the new levels for what the government was allowed to spend. In order to actually spend the money, they had to pass another bill that appropriated the funding or made those funds available to the federal departments and agencies, along with a set of rules and specific direction about how that funding could be spent, based on the spending levels that had been set in the authorization bill. Congress may also set forth duties and functions of an agency or program, its organizational structure, and the responsibilities of the agency or program officials through authorizing legislation. Authorizing legislation can also authorize, implicitly or explicitly, the enactment of appropriations for an agency or program. If that authorization is explicit, the amount authorized to be appropriated may be specified for each fiscal year, or it may be indefinite. The authorization of appropriations is intended to provide guidance regarding the appropriate amount of funds to carry out the authorized activities of an agency. In contrast to authorizations, an appropriations measure provides budget authority to an agency for specified purposes. Budget authority allows federal agencies to enter into a commitment to spend those funds through a contract, grant award, etc., also known as an obligation of funds, and authorizes payment to be made out of the Treasury. Discretionary agencies and programs and appropriated entitlement programs are funded each year through the Appropriations Acts of Congress.
Okay, all right.
The power of appropriation derives directly from the Constitution, which in Article 1, Section 9 provides that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. The power to...
Oh man, is this really going to be 40 minutes of him explaining that Congress holds the purse? Is that the hell we're trapped in right now? Is that really like, is that where we're at? This is going to be really hard. This is going to be really hard, guys.
Appropriate is exclusively a legislative power and functions as a limitation on the executive branch. An agency may not spend more money than is appropriated to it, and it may use available funds only for the purposes and according to the conditions provided by Congress. The Constitution does not require annual appropriations, but since the first Congress, the practice has been to make the appropriations for a single fiscal year. Appropriations, unless otherwise specified, must be used in the fiscal year for which they are provided. For example, this fiscal year 2024 budget under consideration by the Congress right now will only make funds available for the period from October 1st, 2023 through September 30th, 2024, unless the law...
Wait, good question. I've been worrying about how exactly we would push a Kamala administration further left. Not that I give up endorsing her or anything, I'm just concerned. Yeah, again, one thing I want you all to know, and this is why I've been talking about how you shouldn't put politicians on pedestals, is that, like, this is not a channel where we uncritically support politicians. You should never do that. Never, ever, ever do that. You know, the support we have for Kamala Harris is and always will be critical. It is not based on, like, her being, like, the savior of leftism or anything like that. And I fully endorse and support anyone who shows up to her rallies to protest her, to push her further left on issues like Palestine, to push her further left on issues all over the place, like whether it's economic policy regarding her latest plans to implement housing changes. These are all things I think we could push her farther left on. Like, frankly, the proposed changes were good. They're not great. They're Band-Aid solutions. They don't understand the primary problem of why we are where we are in regarding housing in America, right? But we should continue protesting to get better outcomes. Like, that's the entire premise of left movement, you know? And my position is that I think we can push her to be farther left. I think we can do it. I think we should do it. I think the folks who showed up to protest her... Oh, God. To protest her statements about Israel and Palestine, I think that was good. And I think we should see more of that. Like, the time to do that is now, when the plans are still being drawn up, you know? The time to do it is nigh. Hey, 4 frogs in a beanie.
explicitly states otherwise. All provisions in an Appropriations Act, such as a limitation on the use of funds, expire at the end of the fiscal year, again, unless the legislation or the language of the Act extends their period of effectiveness. The subcommittees of the Appropriations Committees of the House and Senate are each responsible for one of the regular Appropriations Acts that provide budget authority for the next fiscal year, beginning on October 1st. If the regular Appropriations Acts are not completed by October 1st, Congress will typically adopt a Continuing Appropriations Act, commonly referred to as a continuing resolution, to provide a stopgap funding to continue funding levels at the amount in the previously enacted fiscal year until a final Appropriations Act is passed by Congress. In some years, instead of adopting a regular appropriation measure individually, Congress may bundle several bills into an omnibus appropriations bill. We saw that last year in the fiscal year 2023 when a $1.7 trillion omnibus bill passed Congress at the end of last calendar year. In rare circumstances, a continuing appropriations bill could be passed providing funding for the full fiscal year, which would mean no new levels of spending would be enacted for the year. Instead, we'd be continuing whatever the funding levels were approved for the previous fiscal year. Long-standing rules of the House and Senate attempt to retain the separation between the authorization and appropriation tasks within this process. The House and Senate place restrictions on appropriations for agencies and activities not authorized by law. However, it is also important to note that unauthorized appropriations or legislative provisions in an Appropriations Act that are signed into law would have, in most cases, full force and effect, regardless of the fact that they violated those congressional restrictions. Most federal agencies operate under a patchwork of authorizing statutes that govern various requirements and duties. There is no requirement in either chamber that the structure of authorizations mirror the account structure of appropriations bills. The rules of the House and Senate establish a general expectation that agencies and programs will be authorized in law before an appropriation is made to fund them. An appropriation in the absence of a current authorization, in excess of an authorization ceiling, or for purposes not authorized by law is commonly called an unauthorized appropriation. Conversely, While authorizations can impose a procedural limit on appropriations, Congress is not required to provide appropriations for an authorized discretionary spending program. So if the authorizers in the House or Senate Armed Services Committee authorize a program and authorize a dollar amount to fund that particular weapon system, the Appropriations Committee is not compelled, therefore, to fund the weapon system to the level that the Authorization Committee has set in their authorization. House and Senate rules also preserve the distinction between authorizations and appropriations by prohibiting the inclusion of general legislative language in appropriations measures. In other words, appropriations bills are exclusively dedicated to setting the funding levels for the federal budget. The division between an authorization and an appropriation, however, is a procedural construct of House and Senate rules, created to apply to congressional consideration. Consequently, the term unauthorized appropriations does not convey a legal meaning with regard to subsequent funding. Next, let's move to mandatory spending.
Okay.
Federal spending is classified into two basic categories, mandatory and discretionary. About 65% of the federal budget is classified as mandatory spending. 25%, or $1.7 trillion, in the FY 2024 President's budget request submitted to Congress this past March, is discretionary spending.
These are the worst videos, by the way, because they're basically just, hey, do you not remember anything from civics class in high school? Here's how the government works, stupid. Because the people that they're looking to get don't know how the government works. You know, like, I cannot really emphasize this enough. The people that they are going for here are not going to be anyone who knows about anything. The only quality they're really vetting for at the end of the day is, hey, can we put you into office without raising too many eyebrows? And hey, are you going to do what you're told? Those are the two things. That's it. Full stop. That's it. You don't have to be good at anything. You could be functionally illiterate. They do not care. They just want yes men who will do whatever they're told.
The remainder of the budget is interest payments on debt. These categories of mandatory and discretionary refer to the relationship between the law that authorizes a program or activity and the law that determines the spending, much the way we just distinguished between authorization and appropriation. In the case of mandatory spending, also known as direct spending, Congress will authorize a program through legislation that both determines its purposes and rules and also sets the funding amount, often through eligibility criteria that establishes who, such as a person, a household, or a level of government, is eligible for the benefit and or who must pay user fees. The authorizing law provides that all who meet this eligibility criteria can receive the benefits determined by the formula. Take, for example, Social Security. The Social Security authorizing legislation sets the age at which beneficiaries are eligible to receive payment and the rules about how and how much they can receive. Every U.S. citizen that satisfies these criteria are authorized to receive payment, and the funding is made available through the Treasury. Therefore, Congress does not set a dollar amount when it comes to the total funding made available to fund the program, as it does in discretionary spending. But rather, the total amount of mandatory spending is set based on the number of beneficiaries qualifying for the program. Other examples of mandatory programs include Medicare, Medicaid, federal military and civilian retirement, veterans disability compensation, and some farm price support programs. These authorizing laws are written by the committees of jurisdiction over each such program, such as Medicaid and the House Energy and Commerce Committee and Senate Finance Committee, and the Veterans Disability Compensation, which is written by the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committees. Other mandatory programs can have specific funding amounts directly provided in the authorizing law. Examples might include grants to states to support child care assistance, highway and transit assistance financed by the federal gas tax, and some of the funding for community health care centers. Changing mandatory programs and their funding requires amending the relevant authorizing law to modify the eligibility or benefits or to adjust those funding levels that are set in the authorizing law. For discretionary spending, in contrast to mandatory, the authorizing law that sets up the program, agency, or activity does not itself determine the funding level, which is instead set in annual appropriations legislation. In general, Congress provides a specific level of funding through each appropriation, and agencies can spend up to that amount as defined in the appropriations bills. Almost all funding for the Department of Defense is appropriated through discretionary accounts, along with the operating budgets of civilian agencies, the funding of medical care for veterans, and grant programs for education and medical and scientific research. In other words, authorizing legislation will authorize the establishment of a program, such as a new Department of Defense weapon system. And then in case of the DoD annual authorization bill, those authorization bills can authorize a certain amount of money that could be appropriated to an individual program. But it's the annual appropriations bill that determines how much funding is made available to the program through one or more accounts and budget line items. It's at the discretion of the congressional leaders how much money is made available, and that's therefore why it's called discretionary funding. The budget is organized into a hierarchical structure that includes budget functions, federal departments and agencies, budget accounts, and budget line items. The first level of organization within the federal budget parses the total federal spending into approximately 20 categories known as budget functions. These functions include all spending for a given topic, regardless of the federal agency that oversees the individual federal program. A function comprises a set of programs that serve a shared purpose or activity such as agriculture, health, or national defense. While some programs serve more than one purpose, they are generally assigned to a function based on their primary purpose. Occasionally, spending within a large program may be split across multiple functions. Each function is assigned a number, and the budget resolution passed by Congress lists spending by function in order of the function number. Under OMB definitions, there are currently 20 functions. 6 of them represent roughly 70% of federal funding and are primarily devoted to human resources. The national defense function, for example, accounts for another 15% of total spending. Other functions make up smaller shares of overall spending. As an example, the budget's function 050, National Defense, includes spending for the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, the National Nuclear Security Administration, and smaller activities in other federal agencies such as DHS and FBI. Both the President's budget and Congressional budget resolution comprise all 20 functions. The next division of the federal budget occurs by agency. Funding in the federal government ties back to appropriations accounts, which in turn are owned by departments and agencies. OMB Circular A11, Section 20, defines an agency as a department or establishment of the government. Every agency has at least one appropriations account. The vast majority of agencies have dozens or scores of appropriations accounts, and larger departments have hundreds of appropriations accounts. As the primary organizational concept for the federal workforce and alignment of federal missions, the agency is the most obvious and most frequently referenced division of the federal budget. Each agency conducts its own budget development process. The proposals are submitted to OMB by agency, and the budget chapters are organized by agency. Executive branch agencies carry out programs financed through approximately 7,500 appropriations accounts in the federal budget. Each appropriations account is established by Congress and includes an agency, account name, and specific time frame in which to commit and spend the funding made available through that account. Although federal budgeting has undergone considerable change over the years, today's federal budget account structure retains a focus on the individual appropriations account. In establishing a budget account, the Congress expresses its priorities, which in turn defines an account's orientation. According to a Government Accountability Office report, the current budget account structure displays a mix of orientations, reflecting both the 200...
So I guess when it comes to money, you can have a mix of orientations, huh? All right, I see how it is.
years of the federal budget development and varying congressional interests over that time. Each of the 4 orientations examined by GAO, object, organization, process, and program, reflects a specific focus or interest of the Congress. An object orientation emphasizes the item of an expense, such as an F-35 aircraft or an aircraft carrier, while an organization orientation, such as funding the operating expenses for a military installation, focuses on the government unit that is authorized and responsible for spending the funds. In effect, the former allocates control of spending on an item-by-item basis. How many F-35s does Congress want to authorize the department to buy? The latter prioritizes accountability for spending the funds, with the responsibility and in accordance with congressional guidance by organization. Accounts with a process orientation concentrate on specific operations or approaches underlying federal activities, while those with a program orientation focus on the missions and objectives of governmental units. Object, organization, process, and program orientations are found throughout the federal budget structure. Budget line items. A budget line item further subdivides budget accounts into a particular...
honest question. Did you need to put this video together? Like, could you not have just handed, like, I don't know, a pamphlet? Or, like, sent this as an email? Like, genuine question here. What is the value add for making this a video? Because, good God. Like, I am not a numbers guy, and this process, I understand it already. Why are we taking an additional 20 minutes? Yeah, the training for this is so weird. I think this is basically just a very, very long and in-depth, well, not even in-depth, it's just a long video to really, really, really ensure that the bottom of the barrel people that they're trying to get here know that once you get into a government position, you don't just have an infinite hose of money to use and waste as you see fit. That there are actually processes for you to get a budget to achieve things you're working towards. And it's not just, as many conservatives think, an infinite money hose. Yeah, they want to introduce Trump, and they know, yeah, you can't read. Yeah. Don't be a felon.
Expenditure,
They did do an
such as a
hour on not
program,
doing
subprogram,
crimes,
or object class. In appropriations accounts, it usually refers to an individual account or a part of an account which a specific amount of funding is available. The President's budget request proposes funding levels by budget line item as published in congressional budget justifications. Appropriations bills appropriate funding by budget line item as a subdivision of the appropriations accounts and published in tables that accompany each enacted appropriations bill. When the President's budget request is submitted to the Congress each February, it's transmitted as several volumes that set forth the President's request for funding by budget function, agency, account, and line item. The main budget volume contains the President's budget message and statements of policy. The appendix contains detailed information by agency, bureau, or program group, including budget accounts, programs, and activities, and proposed appropriations amount.
I'm not gonna lie, this guy also just looks like he's trying so goddamn hard to not say anything incriminating. Like, this guy looks like he's got dirt that he could divulge and is worried that he will divulge. You know, like, that's just how it comes across to me. I am but a humble streamer. I don't know his true mental state. Oh, I don't have an imbued key. That's too bad.
For each account. Other volumes in the budget request, such as analytical perspectives and historical tables, provide technical perspectives on the budget. The budget, as submitted, covers the agencies of all three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. The information contained in the President's budget request is based on information submitted by agencies and revised in the annual budget process to reflect the President's priorities. The Budget and Accounting Act requires the President to formally transmit the President's budget.
Question: does he know where the bodies are buried, or worried that other people do? Yeah, you know, I don't even think it's like a high level crime. I feel like this guy like saw a Republican do a line of coke once and is just really worried he's about to like blurt it out.
Request to Congress by the first Monday in February, although there are no sanctions imposed if the budget is not submitted by that date, as the Biden administration has proven for the last 3 years. The budget focuses primarily on the upcoming fiscal year for which the Congress must make appropriations. However, it also includes data for the most recently completed fiscal year, the current fiscal year that it's requesting funds for, and the 9 years following the budget, known as the out years, in order to reflect the effect of budget decisions over the long term. In addition to proposed appropriations for the budget year, the budget may include proposed changes to appropriations for the current year in the form of a supplemental request or a rescission, and legislative proposals that would affect mandatory spending and revenues over any time period. In summary, the budget provides data and information including the amount by account that each agency may obligate the government to pay, known as budget authority, and estimates of the payments, known as outlays, that result from these obligations by agency and by account. Also includes the amount of receipts that each agency collects from various sources, such as fees for passports or other sources of government revenue, and the resulting surpluses or deficits when receipts exceed outlays or outlays exceed receipts, which in turn affects the level of the national debt. Beyond the primary submission of the President's budget request that is submitted to Congress on the first Monday in September, federal departments and agencies are required to work with their counterparts in OMB to prepare detailed justifications for the funding levels requested in each budget. These justification books, often exceeding 1,000 pages each, provide intricate detail about the purpose and structure of federal programs, the plans that each agency proposes for the expenditure of those funds, and additional details as needed to inform congressional staff and members about the administration's proposals. These congressional budget justification books
how you doing?
are publicly available, often published for access to the public on the website of each department or agency's chief financial officer. The budget committees in the House and the Senate were created by the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. While the duties and functions of the committees have changed over time, and the enactment of new laws and changes to the committee and chamber budget responsibilities, the committee remains responsible for drafting budget plans for Congress and for monitoring and enforcing rules surrounding spending, revenue, and the federal budget. The Budget Committee's principal responsibilities are to develop a concurrent resolution on the budget to serve as the framework for congressional action on spending, revenue, and debt limit legislation. Each chamber individually introduces its own resolution at the beginning of the congressional budget process. When jointly agreed to by the House and the Senate, those bills become the so-called budget resolution. The adoption of the resolution does not result in a new law of the United States, as the President does not sign the resolution.
My soul is leaving my body, chat.
Section 301 of the 1974 Act requires Congress, by April 15th of each year, to complete the action on a concurrent resolution. The central purpose of the budget resolution is to set a blueprint for the overall fiscal and budgetary policy and to establish a framework for the subsequent consideration of spending, revenue, and legislation during the session. The 1974 Act did not dictate that Congress annually approve a particular fiscal or budgetary policy, such as a balanced budget, but relies on the House and Senate to determine the appropriate mix.
You hear words coming out of his mouth, but you can't understand. That's because he's basically talking about how the budget appropriations work. Like, he's talking about how government funds itself. How Congress determines what your budget is, and then you need to, like, request funds from the executive branch when you're a political appointee. That's it. That's all he's been talking about. It's just been wildly, wildly overcomplicated. It's, very frustrating. Because it's doubly frustrating because I know that the reason this guy wants to do all of this is quite literally because he wants, like, to do the worst shit you can imagine. Bust unions. You know, he wants to make sure that, you know, billionaires get to keep the billions in their families when they die. You know, he wants to make sure that, like, anti-gay programs get funded, anti-trans programs get funded. Like, the reason he's giving all of this political advice is so that you can properly fund the fascist takeover of America if Donald Trump gets elected. Like, this guy is one of the scummiest individuals on the planet, and I have zero respect for him. And unfortunately, we do have to finish watching his video because it's very important that we understand the fullness of what they are trying to do.
Of budget policies each year.
The
budget committees are also responsible for the enforcement of this concurrent resolution and associated budget laws. The committee tracks the appropriation process throughout the year to make sure that spending levels in the appropriations bills conform to the levels set in the budget resolution. The committees also hold hearings on the economy, oversight hearings to monitor performance of government agencies, and in the Senate, hearings to consider nominations for the President's Office of Management and Budget. The United States House and Senate Committees on Appropriations are standing committees within each chamber that are responsible for passing appropriations bills. The bills passed by the Appropriations Committee regulate the expenditure of money by the government, making them amongst the most powerful committees in Congress. The constitutional basis for the Appropriations Committee comes from Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the U.S. Constitution, which says, "No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. And a regular statement and account of receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time." Upon submission of the President's budget request to Congress, the Appropriations Committees convene hearings with witnesses to review and consider the President's budget proposal. In 2007, the number of subcommittees on the Appropriations Committee was increased to 12, where it sits today.
Cool.
The Congressional Budget Office, also known as CBO, is a federal agency within the legislative branch that provides budget and economic information to Congress in a strictly nonpartisan fashion. It was created as a nonpartisan agency by the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. CBO produces independent analyses of budget and economic issues to support the congressional budget process. Each year, the agency releases reports and cost estimates for proposed legislation without issuing any policy recommendations. Section 202E of the Budget Act requires the CBO to submit periodic reports about fiscal policy to the House and Senate budget committees to provide baseline projections for the federal budget. This is currently done by preparation of an annual economic and budget outlook, plus a mid-year update. The agency also each year issues an analysis of the President's budgetary proposals for the upcoming fiscal year per a standing request of the Committees on Appropriations.
Speaking of, man, it'd be a shame if the CBO, this bipartisan, non-political group, really came out with a new report about how undocumented immigrants and immigration in general is going to drive like an almost $1 trillion growth of the economy in the U.S. over the next decade. Man, that'd be really inconvenient for the Republican narrative. Oh wait, they did that like a month ago. Crazy.
These three series are designated essential titles distributed to federal depository libraries and are available for purchase from the Government Publishing Office. The CBO also often provides testimony in response to requests from various congressional committees and issues letters responding to queries made by members of Congress. The role of the Office of Management and Budget is to manage the process of producing the annual budget proposals of the President for consideration by Congress. Every President requires and demands for this purpose a source of advice and counsel on the broad aspects of the government's current and proposed policies and budgets. A source that can provide advice in an analytical context, balancing the views of advocates of specific policies with the broader goals of the administration. The technical work necessary to produce this budget is time-consuming, often tedious, contentious, and difficult, but necessary.
Damn. Said like a man who understands tedium. I wonder where he learned that. Why I never would be able to guess.
Despite journalistic and political dismissals of some budgets as dead on arrival by Congress, in fact, this document sets the basic detailed benchmarks from which Congress makes subsequent changes and from which those same journalists and politicians measure congressional action. OMB completes this work. OMB is headed by a director who is a member of the President's cabinet, whose nomination must be confirmed by the Senate. The director has sweeping responsibilities for policy and management. Presidents frequently turn to their OMB directors for advice and assistance, and the relationship between a president and the OMB director may have an important bearing on an administration's success both in enacting and in effectively executing its policies. A deputy director, also Senate confirmed, serves as the director's general deputy with responsibilities for particular matters as determined by the director. OMB also has traditionally had 5, recently changed to 6, resource management offices, organized by agency and program area. These offices, headed by a politically appointed program associate director, account for most OMB staff. I myself was a program associate director for national security in the administration of President Trump.
Cool.
Each PAD oversees a set of executive agencies and related policy and management issues. With guidance and technical support from a central budget review division, the RMOs carry out OMB's central role of assisting the President in preparing the budget transmitted to Congress, and also help supervise the each agency's administration of law and policy. In helping to formulate the President's budget proposals, the resource management offices of OMB assess the effectiveness of agency programs, policies, and procedures, review and assess agency funding proposals and policy initiatives, and help OMB leadership prioritize competing funding demands consistent with presidential priorities and guidance. Once budgets have been enacted, RMOs oversee their execution by approving the apportionment of funds to budget accounts and activities consistent with the law. The RMOs analyze and evaluate program performance and budget proposals.
I'm finding it so difficult to do this. My God, why? Why? Why are you doing this to us? Why throw this curveball in here, man? Why be this level of boring? I even sped you up and you're still boring.
Routinely oversee implementation of
It's
policies
already at
and support
1.25.
initiatives to improve agency management. The RMO staff are the core source of expertise on all matters pertaining to programs and operations of the federal departments and agencies. OMB also contains a central budget review division, which manages the production of the budget, provides input to the budget database, and facilitates a growing array of cross-agency information exchanges. The Budget Resource Division also works with the RMO staff on a variety of tasks and government-wide data collection exercises for special circumstances both during budget preparation and throughout the year. OMB splits budget-related work among the 6 RMOs organized by policy and program area. While 6 RMO portfolios may change slightly from time to time, they are generally organized as follows. National Security oversees the Departments of Defense, State, Veterans Affairs, and the intelligence community. Education, Income Maintenance, and Labor, also known as IMO, oversees Social Security and the Departments of Education and Labor and other labor programs. The Health PAD and RMO office oversee Medicare, Medicaid, the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, and other public health programs. Natural Resources, Energy, and Science oversees agriculture, energy, federal lands, pollution control, and most science, non-health related programs such as NASA and the National Science Foundation. The Financial Services and Housing RMO oversees the Departments of Commerce, Treasury, Housing and Urban Development, Small Business Administration, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the PAD and RMO for Homeland Security, Justice, and Transportation oversees appropriate agencies and programs that fit that category. Each federal department and agency has a chief financial officer that works directly and almost daily with the program associate directors in OMB and the RMO staff. These chief financial officers are often a politically appointed and Senate-confirmed official in larger departments, and in smaller agencies are occupied by civil servants, career civil servants. Each year, the federal budget process occurs in 3 main phases. Formulation. During the formulation phase, which starts about a year and a half before the fiscal year begins and ends the following February, the executive branch prepares the president's budget request. Second phase is congressional. This phase starts in late January when the Congressional Budget Office submits its baseline to the Congress. The third phase is execution. After Congress has appropriated funds, the OMB RMOs apportion those funds. That is, they specify the amount of spending authority that an agency may use during a set period of time, by program, by project, or by activity, so that the agencies may obligate those funds consistent with the amounts and purposes specified by law. The following highlights major milestones during the formulation phase of the budget process in a normal year. In spring, the OMB director issues a letter to the head of each federal agency providing policy guidance for the agency's budget request. Throughout the subsequent spring and summer, agencies will analyze budget issues and options, build their budgets, make trade-offs to allocate their funding requests across their department while working to stay under the OMB-directed department top-line budget amount. In July, OMB issues a circular number A11 to all federal agencies, which provides detailed instructions for submitting budget data and materials the following fall. In early September, agencies finalize their budget requests and submit them to OMB, where the RMOs will begin their process of evaluation. Each October 1st, we have a new fiscal year beginning. Once final appropriations are made by Congress, agencies will often update their budget requests for the upcoming budget year. Throughout September, October, and November, the OMB staff will review the agency budget proposal in light of presidential priorities, program performance, and budget constraints. In November, the OMB director will recommend a complete set of budget proposals to the president after OMB has reviewed all agency requests and considered overall budget policies. In late November, in a process called Passback, OMB informs executive branch agencies about OMB's decisions on their budget requests. An agency head may ask OMB to reverse or modify certain decisions. In most cases, OMB and agency heads resolve such issues, and if not, work together to present options to the president for decision. In December, any final appeals on OMB's passback are submitted to and decided on by the president. In the first Monday in February, OMB transmits the president's budget to the Congress. Following submission of the president's budget request to Congress, we enter the congressional phase of the budget process. In this phase, the House and Senate create their own budget resolutions, which must be negotiated and merged into a concurrent resolution. Following that, proposed funding is divided amongst the 12 subcommittees of the Appropriations Committee, which proceed to hold hearings, inviting testimony from executive branch and external witnesses as part of the budget review process. Each subcommittee is responsible for funding different government functions such as defense spending or energy and water. In May, the Congress begins the consideration of the 12 annual appropriation bills for the next fiscal year, based on the discretionary spending allocation made in the budget resolution. As these bills move through hearings, markups, and floor consideration, they are constrained by the levels and allocations in the budget resolution and the enforcement of the Budget Act and through House and Senate rules. Congress, when approved, sends the final funding bills to the President for signature or veto. Once the budget has been enacted and signed by the President, OMB and federal agencies are empowered to begin executing those funds, paying personnel, obligating funds to enter into a contract, and using those funds for general operations, as proposed in the original budget request and amended by Congress. Inevitably, a budget that was developed months or years ahead of its execution will have excess or be short funding required in order to fulfill the mission of the government. In that case, agencies, through cooperation with OMB, will undertake a mid-year review to better understand how the agency is executing the funds that were approved by Congress, and will propose a reprogramming package routed through OMB seeking congressional approval to move funds that were originally budgeted to an individual account or budget line item.
Wow, okay. Yeah, they'll make sure that the money's going where it needs to go. Okay, cool.
Where there's excess to an account or budget line item where there's a shortfall, enabling the redistribution of funds to maintain efficient operations of the agency. It is my hope that if you are a new political appointee arriving at your federal agency or a seasoned veteran returning to public service, you can apply the knowledge we've discussed here today and these concepts immediately in advancement of the conservative movement. The first major activity for a new administration is revising an already developed federal budget to reflect the priorities of the new president, to be submitted to Congress within the first few months of an administration. If you think about Inauguration Day is in January and a budget is due to the Congress the first Monday in February, there's a very compressed amount of time to make sure that the budget that's been prepared is reflective of the new president's priorities. As an incoming political appointee, understanding the new president's policy priorities, learning the budget process, personnel, and priorities of the office and agency you are working within, and identifying the funding needs required to implement the president's priorities you've been appointed to oversee will be a fundamental skill that you can utilize to succeed in your role as a political appointee. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this course and learn about the federal budget process.
Oh my god. Oh my god, we did it. We did it, everybody. Holy shit. Holy shit. You know it's saying something, guys? You know it's saying something when in a playlist of boring videos, you made the most boring one. We've gone from one of the more interesting, like, evil videos to one of the literal most boring videos I've ever watched in my life. Oh my god. Like, holy shit, dude. What's wrong with these people? The little White House is gonna haunt my brain. Yeah. It is fascinating. It's like a morbid curiosity for how this death cult intends to use our government to kill everyone you know and love if Donald Trump gets into office, you know? Like, and I say that because I know most of my audience, you're trans or gay, sometimes both. That's why I say that, okay? God, dude. Yeah, this, let me tell you one thing, okay? Let me tell you one absolute thing that I know is a fact, okay? This guy is not beating the weird accusations. This guy in particular, this Republican right here, not beating the weird accusations. God, dude. I mean, really, at the end of the day, this was a procedural video. This was, hey, here's how money moves around the government. And please be aware that, like, it's not an infinite money hose to just make your dreams come true. And also, don't embezzle it because they're gonna check to make sure the money's going where it's going. Like, it really did seem to boil down to that, right? Like, that 1 or 2 sentence summary I just gave basically encapsulated that entire 45-minute video, by the way. 43 minutes and 16 seconds, technically, but I'm going to say 45 because fuck it, I'm rounding up. Good God. Them's the rules, yeah. Okay. I have the spoons for one shorter video. My God. Okay. I'm going to go to the bathroom. This is how this is going to work. I'm going to go to the bathroom. You guys hit the follow button, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the buttons. Okay? And we're going to do one of the shorter videos that's coming up, which is about 24 minutes. And it felt like 3 hours. It really did, didn't it? Well, I've been going for about 7 hours. So please hit the buttons that you know help stream. And also consider dropping those subs and donos if you feel inclined. I hope you do, because that's how I make my living. But I'm gonna go to the bathroom, and then we're gonna talk about time management for appointees. That's the next video. That is short and not almost an hour, which is what the next one should be in this playlist. But yeah, you're gonna learn how to manage your time. It's gonna be so good, because apparently government does things, so you can't just sit with a thumb up your ass the entire time, which is what conservatives tend to think government officials do. Let's go. I will be back in a couple minutes.
Are you ready for a very
He called himself a hillbilly, wrote an elegy. His problem and his trouble is he went back and he doubled down on the fascism and the lies, and then he made a fatal crime. Couch fucker, what's your deal? J.D. Vance is cut by Peter Thiel. Couch fucker, why must he lie? We must stop Project 2025. Plug in 2005, you wrote back then only one time. I felt femininely when I saw that movie about New Jersey. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I must deny. And that's when J.D. Vance said he wants trans people to go die. Couch fucker, what's your deal? J.D. Vance is cut by Peter Thiel. Couch fucker, why must he lie? We must stop Project 2025. At the RNC, he felt maybe I'll be free if I take up on this task, being MAGA starting grasp to take over the country. I think J.D. Vance needs a swirly. Couch fucker, what's your deal? J.D. Vance is cut by Peter Thiel. Couch fucker, why must he lie? We must stop Project 2025. Couch fucker, what's your deal? J.D. Vance is cut by Peter Thiel. Couch fucker, why must he lie? We must stop Project 2025. pretend it's in his head, it's in his head. He wishes he could fix what's in his head, what's in his head. He breaks his heart in every dream where they both kiss underneath the sheets. What a beautiful dream. Oh, when he plays pretend, it's in his head, it's in his head. He wishes he could fix what's in his head, what's in his head. He breaks his heart in every dream where they both kiss underneath the sheets. What a beautiful dream. And he plays pretend, it's in his head, it's in his head. He wishes he could fix what's in his head, what's in his head. He breaks his heart in every dream where they both kiss underneath the sheets. What a beautiful dream.
You know, like that's kind of the thing, Amber Brains, right? Like that video was how do I put it? I've talked about this a little bit before on the tail end of other Project 2025 videos we've gone over, but part of the work of bureaucracy is distancing the decision makers from the consequences of their actions, right? And part of how you make a cult is by deliberately doing boring things. You know, you deliberately occupy, you know, your culties' minds with, mindless drivel, you know? Like, it is not all purposeful to be purposeful. Like, if you look into what Scientology does, for example, like you'll see a lot of this. They give people busy work. They give people like a lot of mindless things to do, and I think part of the onboarding process here is, you know, you convey a little bit of information, but you also give them this sense that there is actually like a gigantic construct that they're working with, you know? And part of the expectation that comes with that for a lot of people, especially conservatives, is mind-numbing boredom, you know? And I think that like I think that part of the work of these videos is giving the impression of largeness, of this is a big project connected to the glorious history that we are a part of. And also, like, you know, there's a lot of different levels of bureaucracy you got to work with. And, you know, we're really, at the end of the day, we're cutting down that administrative state. But, you know, while we're in it, you gotta play by the rules for now. And, yeah, you're a cog in the great machine. And, like, can someone explain the banality of evil? Yeah, basically it's just evil that operates in a boring, commonplace way. You know? Like, it is the kind of evil where, like, the bureaucratic machinery is evil, but the evil is kind of dulled by like the mundaneness of it on a day-to-day basis, you know? The kind of evil where like day-to-day under the Nazis, like bureaucrats would go to work and like, you know, yes, we killed X number of people in this camp and X number of people in this camp, and you know, they're just moving around spreadsheets, but at the end of the day what they're doing is objectively horrifically evil, but it's kind of divorced from like the nastier like immediacy of the evil that's being enacted, you know? And you know, you have like these people going into work every day for the furtherance of kind of this evil agenda, but you know, to themselves, they're not really doing the evil thing. That's somebody else's job. You know, they're just a normal guy going to their normal work. It's just that their normal work is destroying democracy. I've heard so much about these videos. I applaud you for really watching them and making it interesting. I don't think there's anything I could have done to truly make that previous video interesting, but I did on the hour-long one that went over like conservative history. I did think I added a lot to that one. I'll fully cop. There's not a whole lot I could have done with the fucking funding video. Tiny White House. Goddamn tiny White House. Yeah, like the purpose of their entire Project 2025 machinery and onboarding people is so that they can dismantle democracy, but like also ban pornography, like ban trans people, like make being gay illegal again. There's like scuttlebutt that they want to the like conservatives want to bring like a case that will overturn Loving v. Virginia, the court case that allowed interracial marriage in America. You know, like there's a whole lot of damage that Republicans want to do that is objectively incredibly evil, and the people furthering it are taking part in, you know, a movement that I would describe as being characterized by the banality of evil.